Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome learners to our Microeconomics and Applications course. This is the 6th lecture of our first unit and I am the course coordinator as well as presenter Dr. Aparna Samudra. Let us see that what all are we going to discuss in today's lecture. 1. We will understand a very important concept of consumer surplus. Thereafter, we will understand that how this consumer surplus is calculated, and then we will have a look at the concept of the total, average and marginal functions. This particular concept of total, average and marginal functions we are widely going to use in the subsequent units of our course. So let us start today's lecture by taking a simple scenario. Just imagine or just visualize that you want to buy a car. And in your mind, you have done some calculations, probably based on the benefit which you are going to get from use of this car, and you arrive at a price of rupees 2 lakh. That is, you say that I would like to buy a car with my maximum price which I am willing to pay for this car is 2 lakhs. Now you go to the market, you go to a showroom and you get your desired car at rupees 1,80,000. So what do you think, learners? What will be your reaction? I'm sure all of you will feel very nice about it. Why? Because you had a certain amount in your mind to buy the car, which was higher than the actual market price of that car. Means you have got some kind of a surplus or a benefit in buying this car. That is, there was a difference between the maximum price which you were willing to pay of 2 lakhs and the actual market price at which you bought this car. What was the actual market price? Actual market price was 1,80,000. But you in your mind were willing to pay 2 lakhs. So notionally what has happened, learners, is that you have received a surplus or a benefit over the cost. And what was that benefit or surplus? It was 20,000 rupees. So in economics, this benefit which has accrued to you is defined as consumer surplus. And now what we will do is we will try to relate the concept of consumer surplus with the demand curve. Why with the demand curve, learners? Because we have already seen that demand is what is your willingness to buy a product at a given price level or at various price levels. So we will now see the consumer surplus along with the concept of demand curve. We have said that consumer surplus talks about, first of all, that what is the consumer's willingness to pay for a good. What do you mean by willingness to pay for a good? By willingness to pay for a good, we mean to say that what is the maximum price at which the consumer should or would buy the product or good or service. So for example, in the previous scenario which we had taken, the willingness to pay for the car was 2 lakhs. So that is the maximum price that you are willing to pay for this car. But the car was available at a lesser price. So the net gain or the difference between the willingness to pay and the actual market price or the price paid for that product is called as consumer surplus. So how do we define consumer surplus, learners? We say consumer surplus is the difference between the buyer's willingness to pay and the actual price paid for the product. Now this particular consumer surplus we can view from a situation where we are only talking about an individual consumer. That is, we are calculating consumer surplus for only one individual consumer. Or we can have a total consumer surplus wherein we are talking about adding up the individual consumer surplus of all the buyers of a good. That is, if there are, for example, 3 people who were willing to buy this car and all of them had set some price in their mind that they were willing to pay for that car. So the difference between their willingness to pay and the price which they actually paid, when we add up this particular difference of all the 3 consumers, what we will get is called as total consumer surplus. So if we are just taking into account the consumer surplus of one buyer, individual buyer, so the net gain of the individual buyer is called as individual consumer surplus. Whereas when we take the sum of the individual consumer surplus of all the buyers, we call it as total consumer surplus. However, both these terms, that is total consumer surplus or individual consumer surplus, may be, they may be used synonymously also at many times. So, let us understand the concept which we have just introduced to you with help of this example. As we said that consumer surplus is derived from the demand curve. Why? Because demand curve shows that at different price levels, how much is the quantity demanded of a particular good. Okay, now I have given you a particular table where we are talking about 5 potential buyers of this particular product, this used textbooks. Each of the buyer, that is Alia, Benjamin, Chitra, Devi and Ishwar, all of them have indicated that what price are they willing to pay for this used textbook. For example, Alia says that I am willing to pay rupees 59 for this used textbook. Benjamin says I am willing to pay 45 rupees. Chitra has also indicated some price. Devi has also indicated some price and Ishwar has also indicated the willingness to pay for this used textbook. So we have depicted this in form of this step line that you see. That is, Alia is saying that I am willing to pay. This is her willingness to pay 59. Benjamin is saying 45. Chitra is saying 35. Devi is saying 25. Ishwar is saying 10. So we are taking an example where we are talking about 5 potential buyers for the used textbook and each of these buyers have indicated their willingness to pay for this used textbook. Okay, so as we have said, what is willingness to pay? We say consumers' willingness to pay for any good is the maximum price at which he or she would buy the product. Okay, that is, I say if I want to buy this used textbook, this is the maximum price which I can pay for it. So that is our willingness to pay. Now, let us calculate the consumer surplus in this used textbook market. So again, the same graph we are taking from the previous slide using the table which we had drawn. And then we say that let us say this black straight line is representing the current market price. That is, in the market when these people go to buy this used textbook, they find that the price of that used textbook is 30 rupees. What will happen? Now there is a difference between the price at which they were willing to pay and the market price which they actually have to pay. So what do you think will happen here? That there will be, out of these 5 people which we have taken, or consumers which we have taken into consideration, 3 of them, that is Alia, Benjamin and Chitra, have indicated a higher willingness to pay for these textbooks compared to the market price of this textbook. That is the price at which they are actually going to buy. Okay, so For example, let us take Chitra. Chitra had said that she is willing to pay 35 rupees. Whereas, how much is she paying? 30 rupees. So there her consumer surplus is 35 minus 30. That is her willingness to pay was 35, whereas the actual price which she is paying is 30. So this 5 is her consumer surplus. Similarly, we can get this consumer surplus for Benjamin. That is, his willingness to pay was 45, whereas the price which he paid was 30. So 15 became again the surplus of Benjamin. Similarly, we can also see that Alia will also have some surplus because she was the one who was willing to pay the highest price for this book, that is 59. Whereas what has she paid? She has paid 30. So her consumer surplus is 29. So these are the three individual consumer surplus to Alia, Benjamin and Chitra. Learners, do you notice something here? Devi and Ishwar, they will not be buying this textbook. Why? Because they had indicated their willingness to pay as 25 and 10 rupees respectively. Whereas the market price of this textbook was 30. So their willingness to pay was lesser compared to the actual market price. So they will not be probably buying this textbook. So we have calculated three individual surpluses. When we add these three individual surplus of Alia, Benjamin and Chitra, that is 29 plus 15 plus 5, we will get the total consumer surplus which is given by this shaded area. This particular shaded area which I am highlighting with this laser pointer, this is the total consumer surplus, that is 29 plus 15 plus 5. So the total consumer surplus is rupees 49. Another way of depicting this consumer surplus is with the help of this demand curve, where we are relaxing the assumption of having only three consumers. Okay, so we say that the total consumer surplus which is generated by purchase of a good at the given price is equal to the area which is below the demand curve but above that price. Now let us see what we mean by that. Let us see, now here we are taking the example of iPads. That is, what is the demand of iPads compared to the price. Let us assume that iPad in the market is available at 5,000 rupees. Okay, this downward sloping blue line is the demand of iPads. Downward sloping means less price means more demand. But right now the price is 5,000 and there is some quantity of iPads which is being demanded at this 5,000 rupees. Now if you see this particular demand curve, which is your D demand curve blue line, the point which I am right now highlighting with my laser pointer, the point where your demand curve is touching your price axis, that is the vertical axis. Theoretically, this is the highest price of iPads which any consumer will be willing to pay. Okay, so any price or this particular area, any price above 5,000 and this blue line, if this shows the various price levels the various consumers are willing to pay. But they're actually paying how much? They're actually paying 5,000. So this blue triangle, which is below the highest possible price and the actual market price, so this blue triangle is called as your consumer surplus. What does it indicate? It indicates that all the above price level of 5,000 but below the maximum price, all these consumers who had indicated their willingness to pay the price level above 5,000 but below the highest level of price, they are all gaining something because the market price was less than what they were willing to pay. So, in a demand curve, the total consumer surplus generated by a purchase of good is all that area which is lying below the demand curve but above the market price. So all this area is lying below the demand curve, but this triangle is lying above the market price. So this blue triangle is our total consumer surplus. So till now we have understood that what do we mean by consumer surplus. So I'm just repeating it again for a recap purpose. It is the difference between the willingness to pay by a consumer and the actual market price. Now it is very evident that if there is a change in the market price, there will be a change in the consumer surplus. Right, learners? Because our consumer surplus is made up of the difference between the highest price which I am offering or I am willing to pay and the actual market price. So if there is a change in the market price of a product, there is going to be a change in consumer surplus. So let us now understand that how price changing will have an effect on the consumer surplus. Okay, now as we have said, let us assume that the market price of a product falls. This would automatically mean that the consumer surplus will increase because willingness to pay is already there, but earlier market price was higher, now it has come down, so consumer surplus will increase. But it will increase through two channels. What are those two channels? One, the consumers who were already buying this product, they will stand to gain now because earlier they were earning a consumer surplus, but at that time the market price was higher than the current market price. So they will gain. For example, earlier the market price was 10 rupees. My willingness to pay was 15 rupees. So how much was my consumer surplus? 15 minus 10, which is equal to 5. Now let us say market price came down, it declined from 10 to 5 rupees. My willingness to pay is 15. Now what will be my consumer surplus? 15 minus 5, that is 10. So already I am consuming this product, but with the fall in price, my consumer surplus will increase. Second, what will happen is that all those consumers who were earlier not able to buy this product, going back to our example of used textbook, we saw that Devi and Ishwar could not buy or did not buy the used textbook because their willingness to pay was less and the market price was higher. When the market price now falls, what is going to happen is it will persuade those two consumers also to buy the product, so the consumer surplus will rise. Now let us see this with the help of this particular graph. Again, taking into account the price of used textbook market, price has fallen now. So these are our 5 consumers which we had seen who had indicated their willingness to pay. Market price initially, let us say, was 30 rupees. So Alia, Benjamin and Chitra were earning some consumer surplus notionally because they had indicated a higher willingness to pay at 59, 45 and 35 respectively, and we saw that everybody had some consumer surplus. Let us say now the price of these used textbook reduced from 30 to 20. From 30 to 20. Just take a moment and think that what has happened now. Earlier, only Alia, Benjamin and Chitra were buying. Now who else is extra buying? Devi can also buy. Right? Devi had said that my willingness to pay for the used textbook is 25 rupees. The price has fallen from 30 to 20. Means that she will also buy this product and her consumer surplus will be how much, learners? It will be 25 minus 20, that is her willingness to pay, minus the new price. 25 minus 20 means 5 rupees will be Devi's consumer surplus. What will happen to the consumer surplus of Chitra? Chitra was earlier had indicated that her willingness to pay is 35. Earlier, her consumer surplus when the original price was 30 was how much? 35 minus 30, which was 5 rupees. Now, when the price has reduced from 30 to 20, her consumer surplus will increase from 35 minus 20, that is 15. Instead of 5, her consumer surplus will now be 35 minus 20, that is 15. Similar situation, we will see that Benjamin's consumer surplus and Alia's consumer surplus will also increase. So with the fall in price of used textbook, the overall consumer surplus has increased by having new consumers of the product, in our case Devi, and increasing the surplus or consumer surplus of the existing buyers, that is Alia, Benjamin and Chitra. So, a fall in the price of the used textbook has overall increased your consumer surplus. Okay, now we will see this again, this example of fall in market price with help of this example of iPad. So this D is our demand curve. Let us say initially the price of iPad was 2000. So the demand probably is 200,000 quantity of iPads were required. Okay, so when this was the case, what was the consumer surplus? The highest point, and the actual price was 2000. So this small triangle in which you can see my laser pointer, this was the initial consumer surplus. Let us say now the price of these iPads has fallen from 2000 to 500. Immediately we see more demand, that is as per your law of demand. What is the consumer surplus now? The consumer surplus is the difference between the highest market price willingness to pay and 500, which is the new market price. So this whole triangle will be your new consumer surplus. This new triangle is the consumer surplus which has been gained because new buyers have come in, because at 500 more people will come in because earlier the price was high, their willingness to pay was low, so they were not buying. With the fall in price, it has persuaded them to buy the product. Apart from this, people who were earlier buying at 2000, when the price is reduced to 500, their surplus will also increase. So this will lead to an increase in the total consumer surplus in the market. So that is what we mean by consumer surplus, which is, we have already said, it is the difference between the price which any consumer is willing to pay and the price which he or she actually pays for the product. And consumer surplus can be calculated by the demand curve, because demand curve is giving you various price levels and respective quantity demanded at those price levels. Now, after understanding the concept of consumer surplus, a very interesting and very widely used concept of total, average and marginal functions is what I will explain it to you. Some part of total we have already discussed when we talked about the relationship between elasticity of demand and the total revenue. Let me just give you an overview of this concept, and as when we progress in this course, in the subsequent units, we will be using this concept to find out equilibrium of the producer, of the consumer. But this is one concept which we are going to use very widely, and it is a very important concept. What is this concept? Let us understand. Marginal functions. What are marginal functions? We say marginal function in economics is defined as the change in the total function which has taken place because one unit change in the independent variable has taken place. I will again repeat. Marginal function is the change in the total function which has happened because there is one unit change in the independent variable. Okay, if the independent variable changes by some unit or 1 unit or very marginal incremental change is there in the total, what change it brings in the total is called as marginal function. This concept of marginal we can extend when we find marginal utility, we find marginal product, we find marginal cost, we find marginal revenue. So all those are indicating that marginal is some change which has happened in total because one independent variable has changed by 1 unit. To give you a better understanding, I have just taken an example that what is marginal revenue. Of course, when we will be moving forward, we will be seeing what is marginal utility. Immediately in the unit 2, we will be talking about marginal utility. Thereafter, we will be talking about, of course, marginal revenues, marginal cost and marginal product. But just for simplification, I am just taking marginal revenue. As we have said, marginal function is what? Marginal function is the change in the total function because 1 unit change in the independent variable has taken place. So what will be marginal revenue? Marginal revenue is the change in the total revenue which has taken place because the firm is selling 1 extra unit. Okay, what is total revenue? We say total revenue is price of the product multiplied by the quantity that we are selling. So if we sell 1 additional unit, there will be some change in my total revenue. How much is the change in my total revenue is called as marginal revenue. For example, we are saying if total revenue is price into quantity, then when we want to find marginal revenue of the nth unit, we say it is equal to total revenue of the nth unit minus total revenue of the previous unit. That is, if you want to find marginal revenue of the 5th unit, we will say marginal revenue earned by selling 5th unit is equal to total revenue by selling of the total revenue of from the all the 5 units minus total revenue by the if we were selling only 4 units. So that difference will give you the marginal revenue. Another concept we have said is average function. Now the average function is also derived from the total function. As the name is indicating, average function basically is telling us that what is the per unit, which may be cost, which may be revenue, which may be product or which may be utility. So on an average, what am I getting? Okay, that is called as your average function. For example, when you want to find average revenue, we say it is equal to total revenue, which is P into Q, divided by the number of units sold. So on an average, how much am I earning will give us the average revenue. So average function is also derived from the total function, but it is telling us on an average or per unit what is happening. I am giving you this table with which you will be able to understand the concept better. So as I have told you, for simplification, just for an example, I am taking total revenue, average revenue and marginal revenue functions. It can of course will get extended to other concepts also, that is average cost, marginal cost, average product, marginal product. Okay, we just for understanding purpose, I am taking this example. In the first row, we have taken the price. Second row is talking about the quantity. As I told you, what is total revenue? Total revenue is price multiplied by the quantity sold. So the first column multiplied by the second column will give us the total revenue. So you get all these revenues. 16 into 1 will give you 16, 14 into 2, 12 into 3, 10 into 4 and 8 into 5. So this is giving us the total revenue. What is average revenue? As I told you, it is per unit revenue. How will I get it? I will divide the total revenue by the number of units I am selling. So if my total revenue is 16 in the first instance, how many units I am selling? 1 unit. So 16 divided by 1 is 16. Then you go, if you're selling 2 units, how much total revenue we are earning? 28. So average revenue will be 28 divided by 2 will give you 14. This means on an average I am earning 14 rupees by selling 2 units. Similarly, we have done it for rest of the units or quantities. Coming to the marginal revenue, what have we said? Marginal is basically measuring the change in the total because the variable factor has changed. What is the variable factor in this case? Quantity. I was earlier selling 1 unit, then 2 unit, then 3 unit, then 4 unit and then 5 units. So every time I'm selling extra unit, how much change it has brought to my total revenue is what is measured by the marginal revenue. When I was selling 1 unit, my total revenue was 16. I sell 1 extra unit, that is 2 I am selling now. My total revenue has increased to 28. How many units the quantity has changed? Earlier I was selling 1 unit, now I am selling 2 units. How much extra are we selling now? 2 minus 1 is 1. 1 extra unit I am selling. With selling of this 1 extra unit, we are seeing some change in revenue. What is the change? You were earlier getting 28 rupees. Now you are earning, earlier you were earning 16 rupees. Now you are earning 28 rupees. So 28 minus 16, that is 12, is your marginal revenue. Now instead of 2 units, I start selling 3 units. What is the difference in quantity? 3 minus 2 is 1. 1 extra quantity I am selling. What has happened to my total revenue? At 3 units, when I am selling 3 units, what is my total revenue? 36. So 36 is my total revenue. What was my revenue when I was selling 2 units? 28. So 36 minus 28 means answer is 8. So my extra revenue by selling 1 extra third unit is 8. Similarly, we are doing it for the 4th unit and the 5th unit. So marginal is basically measuring the change in the total revenue because one extra variable or your independent variable input function is changing. So that is all in your total, average and marginal functions. Now let us quickly now summarize what all we have understood today. I have told you that what do we mean by consumer surplus? That is the difference between what the buyers are willing to pay and what they are actually paying. It is important because it is telling you that how much benefits the buyers are perceiving by consumption of that particular good or service. Then we saw that a change in market price brings a change in consumer surplus. In the examples which I have discussed, we have seen that we saw that consumer surplus increased when the price fell from 130 to 20. One exercise which you people can do on your own is that what will happen to consumer surplus if let us say price increases from 30 to 40. So that is an exercise, self-evaluation which you can do to understand the concept of consumer surplus, how it changes when price changes. Then we understood that what is total, average and marginal functions and how they are related to each other. Of course, all these functions we will be talking about in detail when we will be understanding or doing our subsequent units. I hope you must have enjoyed this lecture. Thank you and happy learning.